Hello my fellow knights and warriors, and today I'm going to continue my tutorial videos about Viking Raiders game, and we are starting covering naval rules. Naval rules are something new for the Cry Havoc family, and I think there weren't many games that use them in the series for its entire 40 years long history. So Viking Raiders is quite a unique game when it comes to this. There are two types of ships in this game. Viking ships that have 8 hexes of length and Anglo-Saxon ships that have 6 hexes of length. They can move in the movement phase, but they are not moving like warriors. There are only a couple of options for them to move, and we are going to cover them now. First of all, ship can make a move forward. It moves right forward without any changes for its entire length. So it will be 6 hexes for Anglo-Saxon ships or 8 hexes for the Viking ships. So let's remove this Anglo-Saxon ship, and let's say he wants to move forward. So his front hexes becomes its rear hex now. So it was 0, 9, 11, and now we are placing its stern on 0, 9, 11. So that's the movement of the ship when it wants to move forward. If a ship doesn't want to move forward, it may change its facing instead. To change its facing, ship must keep its stern hex. So it was 0, 9, 11 again. So if we want to change this ship facing, we have to keep it on the stern hex, and we can move it. So it will be like that. And after changing its facing, ship can still move forward for the 3 hexes when it comes to the Viking ships, and 2 hexes when it comes to the Anglo-Saxon ships. Ships can also move backwards, and no matter if it is Anglo-Saxon ship or Viking ship, it can only move 2 hexes backwards, no more. Well, I guess it is obvious it is not easy to move backwards when you are moving your ship. And finally, if you don't move forward, if you are not changing your facing, if you are not moving backwards, you can move on side. Again, Viking ships can move up to 3 hexes on its side, and Anglo-Saxon ships can move 2 hexes on its side. How it goes? You take a stern hex again, and you move it 1 and 2 and 3 if this is a Viking ship, like that. Finally, which is quite important, ships cannot simply stop. You know, land warriors can declare that they are not moving anywhere, and that's fine, while ship cannot simply stop. Ship has always to move, and when you moved, then in the next movement phase, your ship must still move, but you can reduce its movement by maximum of 3. So, for example, this ship moved up to 8 hexes, and now in the next turn it wants to move forward, but not that fast. So player can reduce its speed maximum of 3 hexes, so now it will move front of the 5 hexes. So you cannot say, I am simply doing nothing. Of course, you can reduce your speed by, for example, moving back or on the rear. That's fine. But even when you moved in such a way, you will have to include this movement in your next movement turn. And that's where the things can be tricky. Let's assume that we moved backwards. We moved 2 hexes backwards, and now this is our next turn. So what can we do now? There are a couple of options. First, we spent 2 movement factors, so these are now 3 movement factors that we have subtract or add to our -2 movement factors, because -2 because we moved backwards. So now we can simply stop. Yes, now this is the way to stop your ship. Move backward, and then you will have to stop. Or you can move backward 2 hexes more, or you can move 1 hex in front, because you had -2 of your movement factor, and then +3 will be 1. So this is something that I found a bit tricky, but if you will play, you will find this is not as complicated as it sounds. Next, every ship needs a crew to move, otherwise it cannot move at all. The number of crew to move normally varies. You need more people on the Viking ship and less on the Anglo-Saxon ship. As for the Viking ship, you need 6 people or more to move it normally. For the Anglo-Saxon ship, 5 people is fine. If you have less than 6 for the Viking ship, but 2 or more, then your ship is handicapped. It can move only half of its movement points forward or backward. It can only change its facing or move side, but it cannot move forward when it's changing its facing or move sideways. And finally, if you have only 1 man on your ship, you can only move 1 hex in any direction. If you are changing your facing or you are moving sideways, you cannot move forward at all. And if you have 0 of your men on the ship, you cannot move this ship at all. As for the ship hexes, ship has middle hexes and side hexes. Foot warriors can be placed on any hex of the ship, but horse counters can be placed on the middle hexes of the ships only. Also, your crew effectiveness might be reduced if there are enemy warriors on your ship. If such a thing occur, then you have subtract the number of enemy warriors from the number of your warriors, and then you give a number of the men who are able to manhandle the ship. So let's assume that we have 8 men on our ship and there are 2 enemy warriors. This means we have still 6 men who can sail our ship, and it is fine, we can move normally. But if there would be 4 enemy warriors and 8 crewmen, then we would have only 4 men to operate our ship, and due to this fact our movement ability would be affected. Now let's talk about landing. Ships may land on the shingle hexes. When you are reaching shingle hex, your ship stops. If you are entering a hex with a shingles and your ship is moving with a speed which is higher than 3, there is a danger of collision that I will cover later in the collision section. And now, when your ship lands, you can get out of your ship. Each character has to spend 3 additional movement points to move out of the ship. You can move out of the ship through the side hexes. You can never use front or stern hexes to move out of the ship. These are impossible to move out of the ship. You can only move it through the side hexes. And as for mounted warriors, they cannot be on the ship, they cannot mount on the ship, they cannot leave the ship mounted, and they cannot enter the ship mounted. So the only way to get your horse out of the ship is keep it dismounted, lead it off the ship, and then mount when you are out of the ship. And same goes to making horses back on the ship. They have to be dismounted, they have to be led on the ship, and then they have to stay there dismounted. This is the only situation when when your horse may occupy side hexes, because normally when your ship is moving, your horses cannot enter side hexes, they can only remain on the middle hexes. But when you are leading them off the ship, they can move through the side hexes, but they cannot remain there. So this is pretty important to remember about when you are moving out of the ship. Also, if you like, you can get your ship off shore. To make it happen, you have full crew of your ship. So it's 6 men or more for the Vikings, 5 or more for the Anglo-Saxons, on the hexes that are adjacent to the ship or that are mixed. So for example, this hex is mixed because it is half the side of the ship and half of the sea. And they have to spend one entire turn without making a movement or combat. Then they are pushing your ship one hex back, so it is now fully on the sea hexes, and then it can finally move normally. Because as long as ship occupies at last one hex of the shingles, it cannot move normally. It is considered to be ashore, and it is staying there at least until it will be pushed back on the sea. Also, one important thing, shingles are the only hexes where your ship can land, but your men can enter any hex which is adjacent to the ship, and there is one major exception. You cannot enter rock hexes when you are leaving the ship. So if our ship would be somewhere here, then characters wouldn't be able to enter these rock hexes, because, as you probably remember, you cannot enter rock hexes right from the sea hexes, and the ship hexes are also considered sea hexes for this particular purpose. Now, let's talk about collisions. Collisions might occur in the certain situations, like when your ships move on the shingle hex with the speed higher than 3, when your ship moves onto any other land hex, or when your ship moves on the hex which is occupied by another ship. An important thing to remember is that collisions can never be done willingly. You cannot collide with any enemy ship or against the land by your own. There is no ramming in this game. If there is a chance when you are making your move to avoid collision, you have to do it. No matter how dire results would be, you have to take such a move to avoid collision. So collisions only happen if you have no other options. If your movement forces you to make a collision, you have to do it. Otherwise, do your best to avoid collisions. First thing you have to do when you are checking for collision is to check for the impact factor. When the ship collides with land, then ship's speed is the impact factor. But when a ship collides with other ship, it is different. If ship collides with a ship that moves in the same direction than this ship, and it collides with its front or rear, then the impact factor is a difference of their speed. So let's assume this ship moves with a speed of 6, this one moves with a speed of 2, and this one collides with this one, so the impact factor will be 6 minus 2, so it will be 4. If they are moving in the opposite direction, then the impact factor will be their total speed. So if he collides with him, and this ship has 5 and this ship has 2, so the impact factor will be 7, because we are summing their speed together. If the ship hits the side of the other ship and they are moving in the same direction, then the impact factor will be the difference of their speed minus 1. So this ship is colliding with this ship, this one has 5, this one has 2, so the impact factor will be 2. 5 minus 2 is 3, minus 1 it is 2. But if they are moving in the opposite direction, then the impact factor will be their summarized speed minus 1. So this one moves with 5, this one moves with 2, so it will be 7 minus 1, 6. And now, when we know the impact factor, we can check for the possible damage of our ships. Now, when we know the impact factor, we can check how deadly and fatal such collision was. We are checking a collision table, and we are taking impact speed for the both ship and for the crew, and we are making a roll. Remember to use the modifiers given below. You can see that there is a ramming, yes, but it is only an optional rule. It is not mandatory rule, and if you play with normal rules, you have to ignore these rules, because there is no ramming possible in the regular rules of the Viking Raiders. Next, when you are add this modifier to your die roll, you get an effect of the collision. First, remember that effect applies to the both ships. So if you will get 7 in the column of 5-8, then this means that each ship gets 2 damage point, and then if you will get a 7 in the effect on the crew, then this means you get 2F for each ship. Then you have to put effects of the collision into use. First, you have to subtract the number of the damage points to each ship, and then you have to see what happened to the crew members. And this one is a bit more interesting. There are 3 possible results. F, which means that character falls to the water. W, which means that one character is wounded, and K, which means that character is killed. And now, the number tells you how many of the characters are affected. So, for example, 2F means that 2 of your characters are falling into water. 1W, 1 of your character is wounded. And when you are checking who falls into water or who is wounded, the affected characters are always the ones that are neared to the collision hex. So, for example, if there would be such collision, then characters on these hexes or characters on these hexes would be the one affected by the collision. And only the characters that are on the side hexes of the ships are affected by the fall result. So if your characters are in the middle of the ship only, none of them can fall into the water. Only characters on the side hexes might fall into the water. The next thing is to calculate ship's damage. It is a good idea to mark and note this damage somewhere else, because damage is cumulative. So if ship was damaged in the one collision, it gains a couple of damage points, and these damage points might increase in the further collisions or attacks. When you know how many damage point a ship takes, you can check the table with ships to see if this number of the damage points is affecting a ship in any way. Because the more damage points a ship takes, the bigger chance is that it will be handicapped or crippled. When ship is handicapped, it has its movement points lowered, and when it's crippled, it cannot move at all. And if it gains enough damage points, it might sink. If ship sinks, then all the characters on the ship are placed on the hexes adjacent to the ship. This can be both sea or land hexes, but this cannot be rock hexes, because, as you know, you cannot move from the sea on the rock hex. If there were any horses on the ship, these horses are removed from the game, they are sinking, and they cannot be used anymore. Also, if your character is on the enemy ship, your character may spend all its movement and combat phase without doing nothing to inflict a half of the damage point to the enemy ship. So if you have a couple of your characters on the enemy ship, there is a chance for you to damage such a ship. There are two limitations when it comes to the damaging enemy ships with your characters. First, this character has at last 4 points of attack. If it has less than 4, it cannot damage enemy ships. And next, it cannot be adjacent to the enemy unit. If there is no problem with this, such character can sacrifice its turn without making movement or attack to damage enemy ship. Please remember that it doesn't have to happen on the sea. If your ship is on shore, then enemy character might move on the adjacent sea hex and attack your ship from this adjacent sea hex. So that would be all when it comes to the movement of ships and everything which is related to the movement. In the next final part, I will cover everything which is meant to be used during the combat on the ships, because combat on the ships is a bit different than the land combat.